Yellow Vest protests continue in France by Learn with News. Level 3. French protesters, known as Yellow Vests, have been blocking roads and demonstrating around France since November 2018. They are called the Yellow Vest protests because of the yellow vests that protesters have been wearing. Yellow vests are required to be kept in every car in France, so they are an easily accessible symbol for protesters. The protest began as a reaction to the French government's plan to further increase fuel taxes in January 2019. The uproar over the January fuel tax increase occurred due to the fact that fuel costs have been increasing throughout 2018. This is on top of other rising costs which have been causing the cost of living to increase while wages have remained stagnant over many years. Although the protests originally started as demonstrations against the fuel tax, they quickly transformed into protests against the general cost of living in France. The cost of living in France has been increasing every year while wages have remained the same. Every year, people have been getting increasingly angry about the cost of living and the lack of employment opportunities. The fuel tax has reinforced the anger that people have felt about all the increases they have endured over the years. Since the Macron government came into power in 2017, a large policy focus has been to combat global warming. The fuel tax increases in France in 2018 and into 2019 have been part of that plan. France has one of the largest rates of diesel vehicle ownership in the world because diesel was historically very cheap in France. However, recent scientific studies have been released stating how detrimental diesel is for the environment. Therefore, the French government has been trying to move people away from diesel-powered vehicles. The protesters have been criticized for demonstrating against the fuel tax by environmental campaign groups around the world. However, in France, a majority of French people are thought to be in favor of the protests. The French government caved to protester demands and scrapped the fuel taxes for 2019. The government also offered other concessions to the protesters. The government promised an increase to the minimum wage in 2019, a temporary freeze on electricity prices, and the elimination of tax for overtime and bonus wages. These concessions have largely been seen as a victory for the protesters. Nevertheless, the weekly demonstrations have shown no sign of stopping. The Yellow Vests have been calling for decreases in taxation for individuals, and some have been calling for the removal of President Macron. As the Yellow Vests have no leader, it is difficult to say which concessions would lead to the end of the protests.